So we'll have a session, and one way of doing that is having a cookie that is basically a customer number or user ID. Okay. Um, don't use a customer ID of 1 and then 2 and then 3 and 4. Why? I go ahead, if I look at this, I look at my own cookies and I say, hey, look, I have a customer ID number and it's 193. I wonder what happens if I make that 194. And if I do that, suddenly I provide you a cookie, you think I'm somebody else entirely, maybe somebody else who has recently typed their password, so you can think I've authenticated and I'm logged in and I can do all sorts of bad stuff. So, and this is not even, we're not even talking about eavesdropping or anything like that. I'm just looking at my own information that I am allowed to look at. And I even have a little example of a site. I'm going to go and show this. There's some website where you can go and buy tickets. A lot of small-time theaters and so on are going to outsource their, hey, we want to sell tickets online. We don't know anything about online. We'll have some other company do it. Great. And so you can go somewhere and find something. And it turns out, this is a web page that ends in the URL with a get parameter, ID equal 353787. And I can go ahead and make it 353788 and pull up something else. And I can make it 353789. Yeah, and yet another, this is a different person, I think. Yeah, we're going back, we're getting different things here. A second ticket to that same event, White Christmas, but go ahead and make it 92, get something like this. Yeah, okay, something off in Lakeland Community Theater, wherever that might happen to be. Makes me wish they put like a zip code and a state on these tickets, which of course is ridiculous to put in your ticket when you're selling to some little small theater in town. But anyway, yeah, so you can try different things here. Oh, here we get the one. This is the ticket that I actually purchased for my wife. By the way, I highly recommend Dar Williams, singer-songwriter. Lots of good stuff there. So don't make your ID numbers sequential, okay, if you don't want other people guessing them. So how do we avoid that? Go ahead and make a really long ticket. Essentially random, say 256 characters, something along those lines. Okay, so yeah, give me some big long 256 character string. I think we already saw an example of that when I was looking at some of the cookies that were on my machine, and they were really long ones. Generate them at random. And then you can, I can look at mine and I'm like, well, great, I'm going to try to guess somebody else's, but I won't be able to guess if there's no pattern to them. So, or my odds are astronomically small. Well, much, much, much less than astronomically small. I don't insult these how small those probabilities get. Okay, so one thing I will mention too, don't make it necessarily just the hash of a customer number. Hash of 1, hash of 2, hash of 3, hash of 4. Why? If I'm really sleuthing and I'm a good hacker, I might look at this, I might get a really long customer ID number, and I'm like, I just wonder if I'm hash of some sort of low number, and I might run hash of the numbers 1 through 1,000,000, write a program that compares them with my key, and if it turns out I'm hash of 4,792, then I might try, well, what if I set my key to be hash of 4793? So don't, when I say make it random, I am not saying use hash of some string that looks random. I'm saying make it something that really is a random number, not based on just on the information. So, okay. I guess it might be reasonable to use a hash of something like some personal information, like my particular name, followed by my ID number, followed by the date down to the millisecond. Now to guess, even if I knew how you generated this thing, I'm like, I need to know, I could guess somebody else's customer number, it might be similar to my number plus 1 or 2, but I'd have a hard time guessing their name of customer 4793, I have no idea what their name might be, and I'd have a hard time guessing what millisecond that thing was created in. Although, my odds are a lot better than the lottery at guessing those things. So you might want to just stick with random numbers rather than hashing up even relatively private data. Okay. Don't let people eavesdrop on your cookies. Okay. So now this is, if I'm able to eavesdrop on somebody else's session and I see somebody's logging into Amazon and I see that, yeah, they have a cookie and it might be some big 256 character string that I have no way of generating on my own or guessing, but if I can see it, then I can try a replay attack. Okay, that's not good either. If I go ahead and say, hey, well, my cookie is the same thing as that one that I overheard, I don't want to be logged in as that other user. Okay, so a good way to combat this is make sure whenever you're sending a session cookie, tell the client, hey, don't send this session cookie over an unsecure connection. Please don't ever even try to do that. Even if you visit me and you visit one of my non-secure pages, don't send this cookie, okay? And we saw in the cookie parameters, there is one parameter when you call set cookie for whether or not a cookie should be sent over an unsecure connection, a Boolean. Yeah, well, for sessions, we don't create the cookie, right? So, okay, so here's the little bit of PHP we need to know. We need to go and, well, we need to call the PHP initialization code. This is a sort of a system-wide flag that we'll set, an initialization flag. So before you set any cookies, before you call start session, before you do anything else, you probably want to call PHP_ini session.cookiesecure. Set that to be true. So that's kind of annoying that you have to be aware of doing that. If you don't do this, you have a security flaw. If you're using your cookie for things you want to keep secret. If you don't care if somebody's spoofing your login because it's a site that has no secure information or whatever, and you don't care if person A is impersonating person B, it's not going to hurt person A or person B, then not such a priority. But good practice, yeah, just go ahead and do this routinely. I don't know why it's not the default. I can't even. Okay. And then finally, what if even through you're only sending a big long random session cookie, you're only sending the session ID cookie, you're only sending it over a secure connection, but still something goes wrong. Some attacker can actually look at the browser and look at that, grab that cookie value, or does some other attack to compromise the victim and gets hold of that cookie. Well, then they can go ahead and log in as impersonating that person. We don't want that to happen. So here's what you do in real life. Every time somebody comes to you with a session, it's like, oh yeah, I have this ID, the session ID, the customer ID number. It's a random 256 character number. I'm going to regenerate that every single time. In my reply, I'm going to say, oh, by the way, please set session ID cookie or PHP SSID. Please set this cookie to be not the old 256 characters, a whole brand new random 256 character string. Do that every single time they contact you. That now defeats replay attacks. So you can do that. In PHP, there is a nice function that does that for you, session_regenerate_ID. Yeah. Okay, so these are the things you want to do in the real world if your sessions have any sort of secure data associated with the session, which probably means if there's any secure data you're keeping from users at all. Okay, so that's our security issues. It's kind of pathetic those things aren't all done by standard built in, that you have to be aware of them and do them yourself. It is good to be aware of them, but the fact that you have to code it yourself every time is kind of a drag. Yeah, we'll talk about frameworks later. Okay. Practical issues about sessions. One big thing to know if you're using sessions, remember how sessions work. Every time your browser makes a request to fancyshoes.com, it sends along any cookies for fancyshoes.com. What if the user is putting up several different windows? I want to see my variety of shoes kind of side by side. And I'm like, well, what if I order this and this with this combo? Or maybe airline tickets is a more common thing. I'm pulling up several different itineraries in parallel tabs and going back and forth, deciding which one I actually want to buy. And what the date, what the hours. Oh yeah, that looked like a really good price, but it leaves at 3 in the morning and is a red eye. I don't want that. Whatever. You want to be careful. You don't want, like, I'll pull up one ticket for Tuesday in one tab, then I'll come along and make another tab where I explore leaving that same flight but leaving on Wednesday instead. That might go ahead and, if you're using session variables to keep track of what I'm looking at, you're now keeping track of this flight here on Wednesday. And then I go back to the Tuesday tab and I just click buy. I'm like, yeah, I wanted to leave on Tuesday. That was a better option. Make sure that you buy the Tuesday ticket, okay? That is, be tab aware in your code. Don't store session variables, or put it this way, be aware that session variables span all tabs, and if that's not the behavior you want, you have to be careful. You have to add in your own. Every page might have a little page ID that it's associated with this particular reservation you're making, and you're keeping multiple reservations along in the session or something like that. Yeah. Okay, so just be aware. That's all I'm going to say on that. Okay, we talked about how to destroy a session. You need to destroy 3 things, right? What are they? Go ahead and pause. Yeah, you want to destroy the session on disk, which is session destroy. You want to ask the client to unset that session cookie. That is, set the session cookie to have expired way in the past. Maybe even set it to null and expired in the past. And finally, maybe even destroy the contents of the current session in memory. Great. If you want to destroy a session, you have to start the session before you can destroy it. That seems weird to call session start and then immediately call session destroy after that. Why? Session destroy needs to know what the session is, and it's session start that initializes all that information under the hood in these session libraries that PHP provides. So a little bit counterintuitive, but you need to call session start before you can destroy the session. Okay. I have a little gotcha here. This is for advanced users, but I think what it is worth remembering is I write a PHP program. Great. It's maybe using sessions and session start. Great. And again, when we're using session, one of my first lines of my PHP program is session start, and then I have a few things I might assign to the session array during the running of this program. When my program ends, it will go ahead and take this whole session and write that out to disk. And the thing to remember about web programs, where you're so used to writing a program, yes, I'm going to run my program, and then they might run it to go 2 or 3 times in a row. But with web programs, these programs are being run in parallel and by many, many different users, by all the web clients out there. 1,000 people come and request the same PHP page. That same PHP program, 1,000 copies are going to run in parallel. Some from the same user, maybe using the same cookies. Okay, I might now have 2 pages from the same user if they had 2 different tabs and made requests in roughly the same time, or they restart their browser, and so it's making requests at the same time. When you call session start in one file, it puts a lock. Okay, PHP is smart enough to put a lock on that session file. Okay, why? You're going to read in all the session data, and then maybe reassign to that array. And when you finish your program, then you write that array back to the file. So you don't want 2 different programs running this simultaneously. So PHP is smart enough; it puts a lock in the file, which means somebody goes and is making the same user is starting a session in 3 different web pages. All 3 will start. One of them will hit that session start first, and the other 2 are now going to block and just sit there and do nothing until this first one ends. If this first one is a really long-running PHP program, okay, which is not good for your response time overall, but if it's a long-running PHP program, yeah, you're not stalling just that page, you're stalling all the other sessions from the same user on there. So good practice, again, the way these sessions are often used, you do a session start, you pull some stuff out, often you're reading stuff from session. You might update a few fields. Usually you know that pretty right away. In the example we saw of logging out, I started the session, I looked at the time variable, I looked at one thing in the array, and then I was ready to update all the contents of the array, and then run the remaining 75 lines of my PHP program. Okay, there's a function called session commit. Session commit says, hey, I'm ready to write this session array back to disk, and I promise that after this I'm not going to make any more changes to the session array. So that helps minimize the amount of time your program is holding the lock, which is a general principle, right? If you're ever holding a lock, try to hold that lock for the minimum amount of time you need to. Definitely grab it when you need it, but don't grab it for more than you need it. Okay. I'm not too worried about that particular aspect. What I am emphasizing is, hey, remember that these PHP programs you write are going to potentially run thousands of copies in parallel. So anytime you're using shared resources, you have race conditions you might need to worry about or think about. So, okay. And then I'll just sort of say, in general, you may have discovered I'm not a fan of PHP, to put it mildly. One of the things I do like about PHP is their documentation. Not so much the documentation, it's phrased poorly in a lot of places, but the fact that it's a wiki, and people can go ahead and post and get their points upvoted. You get a lot of real-world knowledge coming out of gotchas about using sessions. So if you're off working for a company and starting to, my apologies, if you're writing sessions using PHP directly and having them involved with that stuff, yeah, look at the PHP materials and read through the common problems other people have had and the security flaws they ran into and how they get around them. There's a lot of good information on those documentation files. Okay. Have a good afternoon.